On this Wednesday episode of Locked On Grizzlies, Santi Aldama does not get talked about enough as the next starting big for the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm going to make my argument and let Damichael Cole yell at me about it coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a wild and wonderful Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, whatever the case might be. We are so grateful and so happy to have you with us on this episode of the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down and the summer continues to grind on. Aside from the Olympics, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. Something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We here at Locked On Grizzlies are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Michael and I were talking before we started recording about all the fun comments we got on the YouTube page yesterday. It's been a wonderful thing to see as that community grows. We know we got lots of everydayers on YouTube. Continue to grow and continue to be a part of that process over there. But also Spotify, Amazon, Apple, anywhere you get an audio podcast, make sure you're subscribing there as well so that you can have Damichael and I with you every time an episode drops wherever you are going. Damichael, Santi Aldama had quite the performance against Greece, and it was a performance that I believe that you alluded to, my good friend of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. Of course, you on this very program yesterday talked about how Santi Aldama was going to compete against Giannis Antetokounmpo and how you were intrigued by how that was going to go. Now, I have a feeling that you're going to go through the numbers here in a moment. I am going to just flatly say, since I am setting up the softball of a hot take for you, that Santi Aldama maybe didn't outplay Giannis. He was pretty close to playing him even. And I think that the impact of Santi Aldama for this Spain team as one of the only NBA talents on the roster, the way that he is currently playing, we talk a lot about Vince Williams Jr., G.G. Jackson. You and I are on the same page. People like to put Marcus Smart as a reserve. As long as Marcus Smart is on this team, he's going to start. So Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Those are your four starters. Who's going to be the fifth guy? Santi Aldama should be a part of the conversation because he has the shooting touch that, again, you talked about, my friend, on yesterday's show. And if you're going to start a Marcus Smart and you're going to have a Ja Morant and to a lesser extent a Jaren Jackson Jr. also in your starting lineup, it makes sense to have that shooting touch at the big man position since you have a guard or a wing, a perimeter player in Marcus Smart who maybe is not as sound shooting the three ball. So I am of the mind that it's not Zach Edey. It's not G.G. Jackson. I could be talking to Vince Williams Jr. That's pretty small, but it's possible. I think that we need to talk about Santi more in this conversation. Am I just riding the high of the Olympic Games, Damichael?
I got a question for you.
That's fair.
I got a question for you because my question for you, Joe, is because if you're saying Santi should be in the starting lineup, are you okay with the idea of Jaren Jackson Jr. being the starting center in that scenario?
I feel like you and I have talked throughout the years that, yes, I think Jaren long-term is a starting center. Or at least that makes the best version of this team is him at starting center, especially in a 7-game playoff.
Okay. Yeah, so with that being said, I mean, here's where I am. I don't think it's the worst thing that I've ever heard. You know, it's not a horrible take by
I don't think it's the worst thing you've ever said.
It's not a horrible take, but here's the thing. When we talk about the idea of Santi being in the starting lineup, I think you got to look at it from the perspective of, is this the thing that's going to put the Grizzlies, in the next level? Now, look, here's where I may agree with you on. Higher usage Santi is a better player. Santi, where he's just spot up 3-pointers, A couple playmaking opportunities throughout the game. It's give and take. One game he's going to have a really good game, like we saw against the Celtics, Bucks, and whatnot. Then there are going to be some games where he kind of disappeared. It's like, I don't know what to make of Santi in his role, but I think defensively, I'm not convinced enough to say that I want to put Santi in that starting lineup right now. Here's where I do. I think from a rotation standpoint, based off what we see, he's pretty solidified. And maybe at some point we talk about what that means with Jaren Jackson or whatever the case may be there. But right now, I think if you tell me Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey are potentially your starter at power forward and center, and Santi Aldama and Brandon Clark are your two backup bigs who are going to get most of the minutes, I think that those four guys at power forward and center is more than enough to compete, simply because there are going to be stretches where you have that pairing that you mentioned. We'll see some, Brandon Clark with Santi Aldama. We'll see some Jaren Jackson Jr. with Santi Aldama. And we'll see some Santi Aldama with Zach Edey. Santi Aldama is a crucial member of this Grizzlies rotation. And it's very important to see what we've seen throughout FIBA be confirmed when he's playing with the Grizzlies, because he is kind of that, he's that Swiss Army knife, the versatile piece to this front court that really makes things work. Brandon Clark, you can put him at the 4, but you better have a center that can shoot the ball. Zach Edey's going to play center. That's it. It's point blank period. Jaren Jackson Jr., you love him at the 4, but sometimes you play him at the 5. Then there's some rebounding roles, so now you need a better rebounded 4. Santi is that one guy who I think maybe Jaren too as well, but along with Jaren, if Jaren gets in foul trouble and Zach Edey's still in the game, Santi's the one guy that can go play alongside of Zach Edey. If Jaren's unavailable and Santi can step in the starting lineup, if Brandon Clark is unavailable, Santi can play a bigger role. Like, he is the one guy along with Jaren, like Brandon Clark. That's basically what I'm getting at. Brandon Clark doesn't fit alongside everyone else. Brandon Clark and Zach Edey, I'm sure at some point we'll see that pair. And unless Brandon Clark has a career year from 3-point range, it won't be pretty. Santi is a crucial piece to making the Grizzlies go to the next step. I'm not ready to put him in starting talks yet. Just a couple weeks ago, it was a very interesting conversation, and it still is to a lot of people. Like, a lot of people aren't going to see this 19 and 12 with 3 blocks and say, oh, he's still over Gigi. Some people still have Jaren Jackson above him in a potential rotation or whatever the case may be, because that's where Gigi's going to play. Because you're not taking Vince Williams out the rotation. That's not going to happen. So my point to you, Joe, is I do think, in my mind, I do have him firmly in the rotation. I can't put him in the starting lineup right now. I can't do it. I like what Santi Aldama gives you from the 3-point shooter. And I've said it. I think this is going to be a career year for him shooting the basketball. I still don't see a starter.
I want to stress that before I recorded this episode with Damichael, I did watch the U.S. Women's Olympic team gold medal. I saw Simone Biles on the floor exercise. I'm pretty high on the Olympics right now. And in the last 2 games for Team Spain, Santi Aldama, and this is from Grizz Lead on Twitter, or X, at Grizz_lead, 23 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, 1.5 blocks, 1.0 steals, shooting 46% from the floor on 13 attempts. You mentioned the usage earlier, Damichael. 56.3% on threes, 93%. This dude is posting unbelievable numbers through 2 games in Olympic competition. And again, Giannis played for Greece. So I do think that Santi deserves some love in this conversation. Where I pump the brakes a little bit on my own hot take is that rotational question, right? Like, how do you rotate the bigs in that case? It's a lot cleaner to do. It's a lot easier if it's a starting Zach Edey next to Jaren Jackson Jr., or even if it's starting Brandon Clark at the 5 next to Jaren Jackson Jr. I don't think that's what they'll do. But it's easier if it's Edey and Jaren. The rotation is much simpler. You put in Brandon Clark, you bump Jaren to the 5, you put in Aldama next to Clark. Clark can play the 5 some in that situation. There's easier, cleaner lines in the rotation if Santi is a reserve. And again, Jaren Jackson being a part of that conversation certainly is a meaningful piece of this puzzle as well. It's all the more reason to be confident in what the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be this coming season. Let Damichael and I know what you think. Am I crazy for wanting to include Santi in the conversation? Again, I like Vince Williams Jr. a lot. Zach Edey probably makes the most sense if you're trying to model past success. But we don't talk about Santi Aldama as a starter, and he looks the part in Spain. But obviously FIBA or the Olympics are a little bit different than NBA basketball, of course. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael wrote a great piece about Jaren Jackson Jr., this new TV money, how he could potentially become one of the NBA's $300 million men. We'll get into that coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at FanDuel. I love sports. Chances are if you're watching or listening to this podcast, you love them as well. I love them so much I don't want them to stop. And of course, the Olympics are going on, but there's not really any playoffs going on right now, right? It's just Major League Baseball. Training camps are picking up for the NFL. There are fewer games going on, and once the Olympics are over, we're really going to be in trouble. Sports aren't going to be sportsing like we want them to, but FanDuel lets us keep the sports going whenever we want. All we have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime that we're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That is correct. Something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com right now. Start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we continue the conversation. Jaren Jackson Jr., one of the NBA's next $300 million men. Damichael says it's possible. Let's hear how coming up next. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host Michael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Make sure you're following him on X if you don't already do so, at Damichael C. Follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. Maybe you want to see what other kind of hot takes I have. I did argue for Santi Aldama potentially being a starter going into next season. I want to stress potentially. I think Edey and Williams Jr., there's probably more logical arguments there. But I just want to include Santi in the conversation. I feel like his hot start over there in France at the Olympic Games kind of warrants it. Somebody else who should have gotten more Olympic consideration, at least in my opinion, is Jaren Jackson Jr. And we'll finish up this episode of the show talking about some Team USA rotation woes going into their game. I believe they play today, going into their game coming up, how that's all going to work out for Coach Steve Kerr. But somebody who represented USA last summer, Jaren Jackson Jr., not a part of the Olympic squad, getting ready for a pretty important season for him with an extension conversation coming up. And Damichael, you wrote a great piece over at the Commercial Appeal. Make sure you guys are checking it out if you haven't already done so over at the Commercial Appeal website, talking about how this new TV money, the likely rise in the salary cap over the next couple of years, because it can't all happen at once anymore, how that could impact Jaren Jackson Jr. contract negotiations. It's very possible, as you outline in the piece, when Jaren's contract comes up, we might be talking about him being one of the highest paid players in NBA history.
Yeah, it's something that could really happen simply because, well, for one, I mean, that draft class is unreal. Like we know that
Trae Young, Luka Doncic.
I'm talking, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's going to be due. Luka Doncic. They're definitely super max guys, but basically get to it here. See, here's the thing with Jaren Jackson Jr. and the whole contract thing, because it's very realistic. It's very realistic that he could be a $300 million player, but how it works is where some of the confusion probably comes in for the casual fans. So as super max players, or when you get to that, you have the rookie max extensions, and then you have the max extensions with no, rookie designation or whatever the case may be. For example, Ja Morant and Desmond Bane right now, they have the rookie max extensions. On those extensions, you're either 20% or 25% of the salary cap space. Ja and Des are 20%. Ja could have got the 25% kicker. We know it was all a big deal. Remember when Ja didn't make All NBA? And, it was a big deal because he could have gotten 25%, which would have led to, I think, $30-40 million more for him in that case scenario with the extra 5%. But when you get to that next level of contract, which is where, Luka, Jaren, and that draft class, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, those guys who've already signed their other rookie contract extensions. But with that class, in particular with Jaren Jackson Jr., he's going to be eligible next offseason for an extension that could be worth up to 30 or 35% of the salary cap if he gets the max. The super max, which is the one that the biggest stars in the NBA get, it's the 35% of the salary cap. And as the salary cap increases, that financial value increases. That's why in that story I outlined it, that with the TV deal, all the money cannot go. They changed that after 2016. If you saw what happened in 2016, Kevin Durant was able to join the Warriors because all the money just flew in at one time, from that TV deal. So now you're going to have a situation where basically year by year, they're going to gradually increase the salary cap. In 2025, 2026, it's going to go up 10%. The year after that, it's going to go up 10%. It's probably going to do that roughly for about 5 years or so, depending on, some other little things as well. But it's going to be a decent salary cap increase pretty much every single year. But getting to Jaren Jackson Jr. 2025, 2026, when he's extension eligible, he's automatically going to be eligible for the 30% one. He could get the 35%. The 35% extension is the one that would put him above $300 million. That's the one that Jason Tatum has. That's the one that Jaylen Brown has. And Jaren, all he has to do is I say all he has to do, but it's still pretty tough. He has to win Defensive Player of the Year, or he has to be named to an All-NBA team. As the award goes, to be eligible for the 35% Supermax, you get a 3-season period before that designation. 2 out of 3 seasons, you have to be All-NBA twice, or you have to win awards such as Defensive Player of the Year. Jaren Jackson Jr. has not been All-NBA, but he won Defensive Player of the Year the season before this past season. So if he wins Defensive Player of the Year again, he's eligible for a 35% of the salary cap Supermax extension, which, I mean, right now, we don't know the exact number, but I'm thinking $325 million or so potentially. I think last year, Bobby Marks reported in September of 2023 that the deal could be worth roughly around $318 million. But whatever the case may be, it's still going to be bigger than Jason Tatum's contract. It would be bigger than Jaylen Brown's contract. And that's if he gets the 35% kicker. If he's at the 30% one, you take off 5% of that. I think he's going to be, this is if the Grizzlies give him the max. That's another discussion we could potentially have another day, but that's probably 280 million, somewhere around there. But if he becomes a Supermax guy by winning Defensive Player of the Year again, or being named All-NBA, he's going to be eligible for the biggest contract in Grizzlies franchise history. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the Grizzlies approach that situation, as that'll be the first time that they're really, for lack of better words, handicapped from a salary cap perspective.
It's a shocking amount of money, right? Just an unbelievable amount of money that we're talking about here. And it's generational wealth, which is one of the reasons that these guys are very excited about this prospect. I think it's important to point out, and we'll probably talk about this again, Damichael, as those extension conversations get closer, you're worth what the market says you're worth, right? And in the NBA, you can be mad all you want online about Jaren Jackson Jr. making $325 million, but if he meets the criteria and he's named Defensive Player of the Year, quick sidebar, you know who Jaren Jackson Jr. is probably rooting for to be the starter next to him? Zach Edey, because that's going to let Jaren be his best defensive self. And that's probably his straightest line to this type of contract is winning Defensive Player of the Year again. Victor Wembanyama might have something to say about that. Let Damichael and I know what you how you feel about Jaren being a $300 million man, that sort of thing. It always makes me think of Ted DiBiase when I say it like that. I want to do the old $1 million man laugh. Damichael, did you have anything else before we move on?
Oh, for sure. Because I will say that it seems like you think the Defensive Player of the Year route is the easier route for him.
I think so.
As long as Victor Wembanyama's in this league, I mean, it's going to be – I think it's an easier route for him to All-NBA.
Maybe.
I think so. If he averages a couple blocks in the Grizzlies – because that's the key. The Grizzlies got to win games. The Grizzlies win a lot of games. I think that's the better route for him.
But is Memphis going to be able to be good enough to have 2 spots on a 15 All-NBA team? I'm curious to see how that plays out. That seems like a good topic for a future episode of the podcast, partner. Let us know what you guys think in the comments. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we'll finish out this episode talking about Team USA, some rotation woes, Jason Tatum not cracking the rotation for Team USA in their most recent win. I know they're playing today. We'll talk about that coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies. First, I want to remind you about Locked On Sports Today, the first of its kind 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Check it out there. Check it out as part of the Amazon Fire free TV channels app and their hub as well. All the great content of Locked On Podcast Network in one spot without being screamed at or yelled at like ESPN or Fox Sports. Make Locked On Sports Today your second watch or listen over on Amazon Fire TV or as part of YouTube. Again, when we come back, finishing out with Team USA and rotation issues, a real basketball first world problem, so to say. Oh, Jason Tatum doesn't have minutes. Well, we'll talk about why coming up next. Stick around. Welcome back to this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I'm Joe Mullinax, closing out the show for this Wednesday with Damichael Cole. Make sure you're following him on X at Damichael C. Follow me on X at Joe Mullinax. A lot was made in Team USA's Olympics opener, Damichael, and it was a dominant win over Serbia, right? The best team in their group. Who are they playing today again?
South Sudan.
South Sudan, right? And that was a close one for the team.
I got a feeling it won't be as close this time.
No, because Serbia is pretty clearly the best team in that group that's not Team USA, and America beat the brakes off them. Now, Kevin Durant's probably not going to have an all-time shooting performance again, although maybe he will. He is Kevin Durant. And that will be part of our point here in a moment. I think we're on the same page on this. A lot was made of Jason Tatum not playing against Serbia. Now, he's going to play today against South Sudan. Steve Kerr has already come out and said that. Obviously, this isn't necessarily Grizzly specific, but it is basketball, and the Olympics are going on. Jason Tatum not playing, to me, if you want to be mad online about it, or if you want to be yelling at your buddies about it as you watch the game in a group text thread, I don't know why Devin Booker starts. That would be my point. I would probably replace Devin Booker with a Jason Tatum and just go big across that front court. I don't think you can pull Joel Embiid. I don't think that, maybe basketball wise that makes the most sense, but I don't think that works given all the politics of Embiid being on the team in the first place. And technically Embiid is the best recent player on the team, right? The most recent MVP award winner, I believe, that sort of thing, if you're going by awards. Jason Tatum is probably second on that list with his playoff performances, but I digress. There's my one. I think that the big thing with Tatum is the understanding that he's playing behind two of the very best to ever play his position, right? Mm-hmm. Like Kevin Durant. You're not going to take Kevin Durant out when he's shooting as well as he did against Serbia. And LeBron James, even though he is 39 years old, he's older than me. That's how old that man is. I'm old and washed. That guy is 2 years older than me. He's not washed at all, right? Those two guys are dominating at this level. How are you benching those guys? I don't think you can, Damichael.
You can't.
I mean, again, if you want to make an argument for Devin Booker, I'll hear that argument, but you're not benching Durant or LeBron.
It's just, this is how I look at it. At the end of the day, this goes to my old strategy, Joe, where you've heard me say it, and a lot of people heard me say it on Locked On Grizzlies if you're an everydayer. Name does not come before game. Game over name. It's the name of the game. It's basketball. You can't say this for every other sport, pretty much. Like, you give me the 5 best offensive linemen in football, you're gonna have the best offensive line in the game. You give me the 5 best basketball players in the world and the starting lineup, I can give you a different starting lineup where there's better cohesiveness in between the players, and they could probably be better than that starting 5. So the point that I'm making is, yes, Jason Tatum's one of the best players in the world, but let's start with your Devin Booker point, because sure. Let's say you do believe that Jason Tatum's a better player than Devin Booker, whatever the case may be. Devin Booker has the highest plus minus on Team USA right now, and it's simply because of the fact that he has the ability to start in his role at a high level. Devin Booker right now is playing like Kentucky Devin Booker. He's always had that ability in the NBA. When he was coming out of college, if you remember, he was being compared to Klay Thompson and those type of guys. He's just shown that, another level as he's gone into the league as kind of a scorer more than a shooter. But the fact that he fits like a glove alongside of LeBron James and Kevin Durant, he made 4 out of 5 3-pointers in that last game. Simply just spot up, catch and shoot, and he's able to dribble drive. So he fits alongside those guys like that. Jason Tatum can't shoot like Devin Booker. He can shoot the ball. He can't shoot like Devin Booker. So when you think about the fact that LeBron James is going to have the ball in his hands a lot. Steph Curry is going to be moving around and whatnot. Kevin Durant's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. You got two guys that are going to have the ball in their hands a lot already. The ability to have Steph Curry and Devin Booker spacing the floor as shooters. And Anthony Davis has the second highest plus minus on Team USA because he should be the starting center. But that's neither here nor there. And have a guy like Anthony Davis running to the rim. You have the whole entire floor covered in the half court. With Jason Tatum, look, if he has the ball in his hands, which would mean LeBron James, Kevin Durant kind of switch roles with him, it makes sense. But I'm not taking the ball out of Kevin Durant and LeBron James' hands for nothing. So the point that I'm making is it's Team USA. Everybody is a star. Like, all these guys are stars. All these guys play big roles. And when you come to Team USA, some guys have to change their roles. Joel Embiid has struggled to change his role. Devin Booker has looked great in changing his role. Devin Booker is not, you don't see him doing a lot of pick and rolls like he do with the Suns and getting to his mid-range sweet spots and stuff. Devin Booker is just catch and shoot, pump fake, get to the mid-range, kick it out. Simplified game. He looks like Kentucky Devin Booker. That's exactly who he's playing like. Kevin Durant, LeBron James, those are the horses right now in terms of being the engines of the offense. Steph Curry, of course, is fitting in there as well. But game over name all day, Joe. I say it all the time because it's about fit. And the thing that stood out to me about this whole thing is Steve Kerr said that Jason Tatum's going to play. Like, that should have been the end of it. Of course, he's going to play. He's too talented of a player. But for that matchup, it made sense. And there will be other matchups like this one against South Sudan where I expect Jason Tatum to play simply because you're going to need better wing defenders, more wing defenders. And now you can make more sense of, hey, we could sacrifice a little bit of the offense because we're super talented on offense. Let's get a 6'8" long defender like Jason Tatum out there in addition to a LeBron, in addition to a KD, and let's just swarm these quick athletic guards that South Sudan has. Or it may make sense to do that against a team like Canada or whatever the case may be. So with all that being said, I always talk about this, how it relates to the Grizzlies. You know, we talk about certain guys should be in the starting lineup and whatnot. Like, sometimes the best player, just who has the best skills, is not the most complementary to your stars. With a guy like Ja, Desmond Bane fits perfectly alongside it. And now Desmond Bane has turned into a better player than some people may have imagined, when he was drafted 30th overall, or whatever the case may be. But it's all about how guys fit. That's why, with Jaren and Ja, we spent a lot of time talking about the fit there because, Jaren has shot the ball decent from three-point range, but he has not shot well enough where teams are afraid to leave him open off of a pick and pop situation with Ja Morant and whatever the case may be. So, of course, Jaren has the name, but as this game continues to round out around Ja Morant, that's going to be a big key developmental point for the Grizzlies. So that's all it is to me, Joe. It's a very simple thing. Like, I give the football example all the time. I can't think of a better analogy, Joe. Maybe you can, but you're the football guy, Joe. Maybe you can. It's simple. You give me the 5 best offensive linemen. You say, hey, Damichael, I'm going to give you the top left tackle. I'm going to give you the top left guard in the NFL. I'm going to give you the top center. I'm going to give you the top right guard, the top right tackle. I will have the best line in the NFL, hands down. But if you say I'm going to give you the top point guard, top shooting guard, top small forward, top power forward, top center, I may say all I need is a point guard who's very good distributor, who can play two ways. Give me a center. I don't even need a scoring center. Give me a Derek Lively type rim runner, of course, a better one. Give me Tyson Chandler in his prime when he was on a championship team with the Mavs. Give me a nice 3-and-D wing and give me a Kobe Bryant type scorer and give me a Ryan Anderson with defense. I'm just naming guys off the top of my head at power forward. If you give me complimentary players, that's why when people say, oh, why was Derek White getting minutes, or Drew Holiday isn't better than Jason Tatum. Drew Holiday is a better defender on guards than Jason Tatum. That's what they needed. They needed someone who could guard guards. They didn't need a 6'8" guy with long arms to hound wings. They got KD. They got LeBron. So, it's Team USA. Like, no one else has these type of problems at the end of the day.
No, that's very true. And I think the Derek White point is a very important one, right? Tyrese Halliburton is basically the 12th man on this roster. Nobody would say that Halliburton is worse than Derek White, right?
No.
Like, it's what these guys bring to the process for the team. I hear what you're saying on Devin Booker, and I do think that he makes more sense. The only thing that I would be worried about if I were Grant Hill, thinking about the long-term building of this, Jason Tatum just won an NBA championship, right? And he goes off from, instead of having an off season, because it's already a shorter off season, he goes and plays for Team USA. 4 years from now, LeBron James isn't going to be there. Kevin Durant's not going to be there. Steph Curry's not going to be there. Jason Tatum may not be there because he might say it's not worth his time. And that's where the politics of this comes into play. You laugh, but it's these guys, again, basketball is unique. You brought up the offensive line a moment ago. There's no more selfless position group in all of sports than the offensive line. Those dudes get into small car crashes every single play, and they never get their names announced. They're not saying touchdown, Patrick Mahomes, great blocking, right? Maybe Tony Romo is, but nobody else is doing that. They're not saying that on the loudspeaker. Right. The NBA is a very different animal in that way. These guys have pretty massive egos. We're talking about Jaren Jackson Jr., who's what? Top 30 in the NBA, maybe. Yeah. I think that's a fair, making $300 million. These guys, the system has pros and cons to it. And I do think, Jason Tatum doesn't seem to be that kind of guy. So I think it'll be all right. But if I were Jason Tatum and I know that I'm, better than what I'm being used as, it'll be interesting to see how the minutes get divvied out against South Sudan. That's all I'll say, ending that part of the conversation. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We're closing out July. We head into August next month, obviously, and we head into August with our next episode. Lots of things to break down. Maybe we'll take a closer look at that Team USA situation. Still could check in on Luke Kennard. Lots of different layers we can take as the NBA offseason enters the dog days, Damichael.
Yeah, I think it's time to check in on Luke Kennard as well. People are wondering. People have been asking a little bit. So, let's get into it. Might have a couple new things to add to the conversation.
Ooh, I like that. That's a solid plug for our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're with us. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, YouTube. Make us both an audio and a visual part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. Make Locked On NBA and then Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and Amazon Fire on the free TV channels app. Your next watches and listens as your day goes on. Make sure that you are in every tier to Locked On Grizzlies each and every time an episode drops. Make sure you're hanging out with us and checking out our program. Excited for August, excited for the grind to continue, and excited for you to join us next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. For Damichael, I'm Joe. Stay locked in. Amazon, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.